My name is Savannah. I am 36 years old, a real estate attorney living and working in Boston. To most people, I am a strong, independent woman who knows what she wants and never leans on anyone. But there has always been one thing I could never let go of: the farm in Vermont that my grandmother left me, the place where I grew up, the only place I ever truly called home. Last week, at my mother's 65th birthday party, with over 60 elegantly dressed guests filling the grand hall of a New York hotel, my father raised his glass, smiled proudly, and declared, "The house in Vermont, along with all the land, will go to Ethan. Savannah has agreed and will move out within 72 hours." Applause erupted around the room. All eyes turned toward me, the eldest daughter, the sister standing silently in the corner, still holding my mother's birthday gift in my hands. I said nothing. I only gave a faint smile, because I knew very well I had never agreed, and they had no idea what I was holding on to. If you've ever been betrayed by your family, stripped of what was rightfully yours simply because you weren't the chosen child, share your story in the comments below. You are not alone. Like and subscribe if you want to hear this story to the end, because what happened after that party ensured they would never dare underestimate me again. I still remember so vividly the faint scent of lavender in the morning sun, the creak of wooden floors under my feet, and my grandmother Eleanor's voice calling from the kitchen with her familiar words, "Wake up. Sweetheart, it's a beautiful day. Let's plant another row of carrots today." I grew up on that Vermont farm, a white-painted wooden house nestled in a valley filled with crimson maples every autumn. Everything there was simple, yet carried a warmth I never found anywhere else. My parents, Linda and Charles, lived in New York, always busy with meetings, deals, and parties, where children like me were never welcome. They sent me to live with my grandmother when I was 6 years old, at first for just a summer, then for the school year, and eventually for my entire childhood. My mother still called every week, usually to ask about my grades or scold me for not wearing ribbons in my hair for the class photo. My father rarely called. Some birthdays, I only got a card with a pre-printed signature. But my grandmother, Eleanor, she was always there. She was not just a caretaker, she was the one who taught me what unconditional love truly meant. She never scolded me when I broke a porcelain vase or forgot to water the plants. She would simply look at me with eyes both firm and kind and ask, "What did you learn from this, Savannah?" She believed every mistake was a chance to grow, and from picking up shattered pieces of pottery, I learned how to face consequences without running away. Every morning, we walked out to the backyard garden together. She showed me how to prune tomato vines, how to tell the difference between clay soil and sandy soil, how to read the climate chart pinned in the living room to plan planting seasons. Her hands were rough and calloused, yet every movement was gentle, as if she were tending not just to a garden, but to me. She once told me, "When you learn how to care for a garden, you learn how to care for yourself." The farm wasn't large, but it was big enough for me to run barefoot through the meadows, climb the apple tree behind the chicken coop, and imagine a whole world of my own. There was a swing tied to the branches of an old oak tree where I read hundreds of books, from fairy tales to constitutional law. Eleanor had been a teacher before retiring. She believed in knowledge the way others believe in sunlight. "You can lose everything," she would say. "But if you can think, if you can read, you'll always find a way." She never spoke of money as something to admire. While my parents used words like investment, assets, and profit strategies, she only cared whether I had finished To Kill a Mockingbird and whether I had remembered to water the watermelon patch on the west side. As I grew older, the contrast between my life on the farm and my parents' world in the city became painfully clear. Each summer, my younger brother Ethan was sent to stay for a few weeks. My mother called it bonding time for the kids. But Ethan never liked the farm. He complained the house was old, the garden dirty, and hated anything that required him to touch soil. "I don't get why you like living like some farmer," Ethan once said, only 10 years old but already full of disdain. Ethan was always the family pride. He played golf well, went to prestigious private schools, and had his photos hung all over my father's office. Every small achievement of his was posted on my mother's Facebook as if it were a trophy. And me? I was only mentioned when someone asked, "Where's your daughter studying again?" Still, I never envied him. I had my grandmother. I had evenings listening to jazz by the fireplace, bedtime stories told in her soft voice like the warmth of a quilt. I had dinners of meat, pies, and homemade blueberry jam. I had summer nights lying on the brick porch, pointing at the sky, learning the names of constellations. She never told me who I had to become. She only reminded me, live like a tree, deep roots, wide branches, and never fear standing alone. And so I lived that way. I studied, won scholarships, went to college, then law school. I worked side jobs to pay my expenses because I refused to rely on my parents' reluctant handouts. I managed on my own. I was strong because I was raised by a woman just as strong. On my graduation day, she wore her old knit sweater and stood among a crowd of families in expensive suits, opening her arms wide to hug me. "You did it," she whispered, eyes glistening. "But to me, you've been the woman I'm proud of for a very long time." No one else from my family showed up, but I didn't feel lacking. I had her. And I had every memory of my childhood wrapped inside that white farmhouse in Vermont, the place they now call transferable real estate. But to me, it was blood. It was soul, something they could never buy back with papers. And it was also the place they never imagined I had prepared everything to protect. I left Eleanor's farm at 18, carrying an old suitcase, a few plain clothes, and a full scholarship to Boston Law School. There was no farewell party, no advice from my parents. Only my grandmother's eyes watching me from the porch, her hand holding a handkerchief embroidered with daisies, her lips pressed tightly to hold back tears. I walked away quickly, not because I was in a rush, but because I couldn't let her see the tears sliding down my own cheeks. Boston was colder than I expected. Cold from the sea wind, and cold in how people passed each other without a second glance. It took me nearly 2 months to adjust to the city's rhythm, to classrooms without the smell of apple pie in the morning, to dinners eaten alone at my desk instead of by a crackling fire. I chose real estate law not for money, but because I wanted to understand every inch of land, every clause that could be used to protect places like the Vermont farm. I worked at the library, then interned at a small law office that specialized in land disputes. While other students immersed themselves in weekend galas, I spent nights with case files and black coffee. No one guided me. I stumbled in the dark and slowly learned to light my own path. In 4 years, my mother called me only twice. Both times, it was to announce Ethan had gotten into some prestigious MBA program, and to remind me not to be jealous but to be happy for your brother. I smiled faintly into the phone, voice flat. "I'm not jealous." I said, "I just noticed you called without asking how I was living." Silence on the other end. Then a quick reply, "I'm busy." So was I. Graduating at the top of my class, I joined a large law firm in Boston. The work was grueling, the competition fierce, but I thrived. What I had learned in school was only the beginning. Reality was the real battlefield facing corporations, wealthy clients, and those too powerless to defend themselves unless I spoke for them. I remember one case, an elderly couple being forced to sell their land to a supermarket chain. I spent nearly 3 months combing through decades-old contracts, until I found a tiny loophole in land use agreements that allowed them to keep their home of 40 years. They cried when the court ruled in their favor. I only stood quietly, my heart light as the first breeze of spring. That was the moment I truly felt I was fulfilling what Eleanor had always hoped for. I bought a small apartment in South End, with oak flooring and one of her embroidered pieces framed in the living room. I never lived far from my roots, even surrounded by glass towers and fancy dinners. While I built my life brick by brick, Ethan drifted like a leaf in the wind. He finished his MBA but never worked. My parents invested in his travel tech startup. 6 months later, it collapsed, a failed strategy, as my mother explained. He's young. Everyone stumbles, she said in one rare call. How long will you keep funding him? I asked. He's my son. You wouldn't understand. I didn't argue. I didn't need to understand anymore. 3 years later, Ethan tried real estate, then cryptocurrency, then a coffee shop. Each ended in debt and my parents' shrug. Charles, my father, had once been a renowned investment expert. In business, he had rules. In family, he had none. To him, Ethan was the natural heir, and I was the headstrong daughter unwilling to cooperate. You always do things your own way, he said in a rare family meeting. Because my opinion is never heard, I answered. He looked at me with eyes cold as stone. You think being good at what you do gives you the right to lecture this family? I stood, placing my hand on the dark wooden table, and replied calmly, No, I'm not the best. I just refuse to depend on anyone, and I won't let anyone speak for me. From then on, I knew my place in the family, silent at the edge of the table, mentioned only with words like doing fine, too independent, stubborn but smart. I demanded nothing. I expected no recognition. I had my work, my clients' trust, and a life I built myself. And I often drove back to Vermont on weekends. That old farmhouse still stood, steadfast like the faith my grandmother once had. I fixed the roof, replaced windows, repainted the white fence. Not because I needed to live there, but because I needed to preserve something pure in a world that kept changing. Every time I cut weeds by the porch, I could almost hear Eleanor's voice in my ear. Never let anyone decide your worth, and never let anyone take away the place you belong. I never forgot those words. I just never imagined the day would come when my own parents would try to do exactly that. Eleanor passed away on an early winter morning. I was in Worcester, handling a farmland dispute, when I got a call from her neighbor Melody, who often helped with groceries in bad weather. Her voice trembled on the phone. You should come right away, Savannah. She's in her chair, looking like she's sleeping. But she's gone. I drove back to Vermont under a gray sky, snowflakes drifting down. The roadside scenery blurred like an old film reel. Bare maples, white meadows, the dark-stained porch weathered by time. The house was the same, but quieter than ever. Melody met me at the door. She said little, just squeezed my hand before stepping aside. My grandmother sat in her old armchair, where she always knitted scarves each winter. A book face down on her lap, a wool blanket over her knees. Her face was peaceful, almost smiling. I knelt beside her, clutching her cold fingers. As a lawyer, I had seen many deaths, many rigid funerals. But with her, it was a gentle passing, as if she had chosen the right time, the right place to let go. I buried her beside my grandfather. On the pine hill behind the farm, the spot she once called the highest place to look over an entire life. The whole family showed up for the funeral. My mother wore a long black coat, standing apart from the crowd. My father shook hands with every guest like a politician running an event. Ethan arrived nearly an hour late, bringing along his new girlfriend, a tall woman in sunglasses who kept checking her phone. No one asked me how my grandmother passed away. They only asked the usual questions. Where's the will? Who gets what? Is there any property to sell? After the funeral, the family gathered at the office of Attorney Owen, a longtime acquaintance of my grandmother. The air in the room was stifling, not from the number of people, but from the weight of expectation in their eyes. Mr. Owen set a leather case on the table, removed his glasses, and spoke evenly. Eleanor's will was drafted in 2017, legally notarized, and remains valid. I stared at him in silence. He began reading. According to the will, most of the cash assets were divided equally between my mother and my Uncle David, who lives in Florida. A smaller sum was left to me and Ethan. A few items of jewelry, antiques, and paintings, things of sentimental value, were specifically designated for each grandchild. No one asked about the farm. Not a single line in the will mentioned the wooden house or the nearly 10 acres of land my grandmother had safeguarded for half a century. My father raised an eyebrow and whispered something to my mother. Ethan shrugged, smirking as if he'd just won an unexpected prize. I sat motionless, not because I was surprised, but because I understood. She hadn't put it in the official will. She had left it to me alone by another means. That afternoon, after everyone had left, Mr. Owen came to me quietly. "Miss Savannah, there's something I need to give you privately, per Eleanor's instructions." He handed me a thick envelope, sealed with red wax. I took it back to the farm. Alone in the living room, I sat in the armchair where she used to rest. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope, not from the cold, but from the surge of emotion. Inside was a handwritten letter, her slanted script still steady and elegant as ever. "My dear Savannah, if you're reading this, it means I've found my peace. And you're sitting in this house, our house. I've spent nearly my whole life here, and there's no other place I would rather leave to you. You're the only one who understands that this place is more than a roof. It holds memories, lessons, and the strength I saw in you from the very beginning. I leave this house and all the land to you through a separate will, fully notarized. Attorney Jackie Anderson, an old school friend of mine, has held the file for 3 years. Contact her. Do not let anyone take this place from you, Savannah. Do not let anyone call it an asset to be sold or divided. Because this is your home, forever." Tears fell onto the faded ink as I laid the letter down. Beneath it was a notarized copy of a supplemental will, signed and sealed, transferring full ownership of the house and the land to me without condition. I sat by the window for a long time, looking out at the garden she had tended row by row. What I felt wasn't triumph for inheriting, but a burning conviction that I had to protect it at all costs. I knew my family wouldn't accept this easily, and I also knew the storm behind this letter was only beginning to form on the horizon. My mother's 65th birthday party was held at a boutique hotel in the heart of Manhattan, where crystal chandeliers glittered above champagne glasses and laughter mixed with music into a sound that felt foreign to me, lively, yet hollow. My mother, Linda, appeared radiant in a pearl satin dress, a Hermes silk scarf draped around her neck. She laughed often, kissed each guest in turn, receiving compliments like a movie star. Charles stood beside her, wineglass in hand, nodding just enough, playing his usual role at gatherings he treated like PR campaigns. I arrived on time, carrying a bouquet of peonies from the Vermont garden, the flowers my grandmother had planted around the porch, the same ones my mother once called provincial. I didn't plan to stay long. My intention was simple: show up, offer my congratulations, give my gift, and quietly leave. But they had staged everything, and I was the pawn set up to be exposed in front of the entire room. After dessert, as the lights dimmed and applause swelled with the birthday song, my father stepped to the center of the hall, adjusting the microphone. "I want to thank all our friends, partners, and family for being here today to celebrate my wife, the wonderful woman who stood beside me for more than 4 decades. The applause was thunderous. "On this special occasion, we'd also like to share a family decision we've made as a gift for the future." I frowned slightly. Charles cleared his throat. "After much consideration, Linda and I have decided to transfer ownership of the Vermont farm to our son Ethan." I froze. Murmurs rippled across the hall. I caught whispers. Oh, that's Eleanor's old house? Savannah must be pleased. Makes sense. Ethan's the man, trying to rebuild after his setbacks. But that wasn't the worst part. My father continued, and we're so glad that Savannah has fully supported her brother. She signed the transfer papers as a gesture of complete family unity. My vision darkened. Eyes turned toward me. I saw confusion in some of my grandmother's old friends, nods of approval from a few uncles, and the smug smile of Ethan, arms crossed, leaning against a pillar, eyes gleaming with victory. I rose slowly, setting my glass down. I didn't say a word. I simply walked out of the hall, through the buzzing whispers crawling into my head like ants. No one stopped me. No one asked if I had truly agreed. The corridor lights cast shadows across the tiled floor. I inhaled deeply, the storm raging inside me hidden behind a calm face. I called a car and returned to my Boston apartment that night. On the way, I checked my email. Just as I suspected, there was an attached contract from Ethan, sent to my personal address with a smug note. Thanks again, sis. Mom and Dad are so proud. I opened the PDF. A consent to transfer property agreement, dated 3 weeks earlier. At the bottom was my signature, same slant, same strokes, but not mine. I had spent hours perfecting my signature in law school so it couldn't be forged. I had also taught others how to spot a scanned signature pasted in with software. This was a textbook example. I sat in the car, the contract glowing on my phone screen like a declaration of war. Not anger, clarity. They had planned this long ago. They waited for an audience, for champagne, for the glittering lights and applause to turn me into a puppet in their family performance. But they forgot one thing. I was no longer the confused child they remembered. I was a real estate attorney specializing in property disputes. I knew the law, and I didn't need to scream in a ballroom to prove anything. All I needed was the truth. The next morning, I drove to Vermont. In the mist curling over the winding road, I stopped at the farm gate, staring at the wooden house still standing strong after so many winters. From the trunk, I pulled out a folder, Eleanor's notarized will, her handwritten letter. The deed already transferred to my name over a year earlier through attorney Jackie Anderson, her old friend. Quietly, I checked the locks, then tapped my phone. The upgraded security system connected. The house was no longer just a place I loved. It was a fortress I would defend. My parents wanted to cast me as the sister supporting her brother. Ethan wanted to be the rightful heir in the family's eyes. But I had the law, the evidence, and the memories, things they could neither forge nor steal. In that moment, I sat on the porch, unfolded her letter again. Do not let anyone take this place, Savannah. I whispered it to myself, eyes fixed on the peonies swaying in the breeze. And I was ready. I returned to Boston the next day in silence, offering no explanations to anyone. In the cold hallway of my apartment, I brewed a cup of ginger tea, sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and sent a single message. Rachel, need to meet urgently. Personal matter, property dispute, level, high. 12 minutes later, she replied. Small conference room, noon tomorrow, bring every document. Rachel Monroe was one of the few people I trusted almost completely in the legal world. We had studied land law together in our second year, once staying up all night over an eminent domain case in Worcester. Rachel was sharp, rational, never letting emotion cloud her judgment. More importantly, she was the kind who never asked unnecessary questions. The next morning, I carried a large leather-bound file. Inside was Eleanor's separate notarized will, her handwritten letter, the county-issued deed in my name, and the forged document Ethan had emailed me after the party. Rachel examined each page, as though inspecting dust on glass. Sunlight stretched long shadows across the wooden table. She flipped slowly, then looked up at me after a pause. Your signature was forged. I know, I answered evenly. The scan was high quality, but the Grefford's base contract came from a notarized form I handled in 2020. Ethan never imagined I kept the original hard copy with the ink seal. Rachel smirked faintly. You've always been meticulous. Your grandmother's will is airtight. Legally, you're safe. But strategically, we need to move first. I nodded. I don't want a public lawsuit. Not yet. My family lives for appearances. I want them to expose themselves. Rachel leaned back. All right, then we play endgame chess. What do you need? First, certified verification from the county registry proving independent ownership, no conditions. Already in motion, she texted quickly. I know someone at the Lamoille registry office. They'll send the verified copy by the weekend, I continued. Second, a handwriting analysis, every stroke broken down, showing the flaws in pen pressure and flow. Consider it done. And finally, upgraded security at the farm. I've changed the locks, but I need full perimeter cameras with motion sensors, remote alerts, cloud storage, VPN protected. Rachel raised an eyebrow. You think they'll actually come there? Not think. Certain. That afternoon, I drove to Parker Security, a small but highly efficient firm run by a former military engineer. His name was Marcus, short and broad-shouldered, voice low and precise. I laid out the farm's floor plan. He studied it carefully, then nodded. 4 outdoor cameras, front, back, and both sides. 3 inside main entrance, kitchen, and living room. All equipped with heat sensors, alarms for unusual movement. How long do you want the footage stored? 3 months, extendable if needed. Remote access from your phone? I need private encryption. No one but me can know. Marcus signed the contract on the spot. He promised to have his team install everything within 24 hours. I paid the full amount in advance from a personal account my parents knew nothing about. That night, I drove back to Vermont. The moon rose early, casting soft silver light across the pines behind the house. I parked in the yard, unlocked the door quietly, turned on a small lamp in the living room, then checked each window, all intact. I stood before Eleanor's portrait on the wall, gently touching the faded wooden frame. I won't let them take this place, Grandma. The next morning, Marcus arrived right on time. 2 young technicians came with him, carrying boxes of equipment and heavy coils of cable. They worked quickly and efficiently, asking nothing beyond the technical details. I requested that the system send encrypted alerts whenever someone crossed the fence line. Marcus assured me I would receive real-time updates no matter where I was. Once everything was complete, I signed off, stored my password on an offline device, and locked it in the safe. Rachel called while I was wiping down the kitchen table, where my grandmother once taught me to bake pumpkin pie. The land registry confirmed your title is clean, no conditions attached. I just sent you the email. I sat down, opened my laptop. The words glowed like a firm seal of law. Savannah E. Warren is the sole and lawful owner of the property located on Maple Lane, Vermont. No transfer clauses or co-ownership provisions exist under any form. I printed a copy, folded it neatly, and slipped it into my prepared file. A breeze rattled the last pots of asters my grandmother had left on the porch. I watched them, my heart calm. They could say whatever they liked over glasses of wine and empty compliments. They could stage their picture-perfect family script, cast me as the silent extra. But from this moment, everything they did would be recorded, and I would hold every key to unlock the truth. I began withdrawing from calls, messages, and their feigned concern, letting my silence look like proof that they had won. My mother sent a polite line after the party. Thank you for being so mature the other night. Ethan was very touched. I didn't reply. My father was entirely silent, no emails, no calls. I knew he was busy smoothing the path to make that so-called family decision into a legal transaction, at least on the surface. I wasn't surprised when, a week later, Rachel forwarded me a draft contract between Charles and a developer called Northbridge Holdings. They wanted to buy a portion of the farm to build luxury vacation villas, part of the highly publicized Green North Vermont suburb project. You have 3 acres on the east side listed separately in the annex, Rachel said when we met at a small cafe near South Station. They think it's unassigned because the 1987 records were never fully updated. I flipped through the papers, jaw tight. Charles plans to use that parcel for a backdoor transfer without my name involved. Rachel nodded. They'll put Ethan up as the representative. Your father will stay behind the scenes using his connections to make it all look clean. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. Then it's time I use Haven Creek. That was the name I had registered 3 months earlier for a limited liability company. A name vague enough to throw them off, yet carrying a touch of memory, the small stream that ran through the back of Eleanor's garden. Haven Creek LLC was based in Boston, with a shared office in a Class B building. Its shareholder list was sealed under Delaware law. I was the sole manager, but my name appeared on no public record. Rachel raised an eyebrow. You're planning to buy the land from your own parents? Not from them, I said quietly. From the partner they think is waiting. Through Haven Creek, Rachel reached out to Northbridge's legal counsel, posing as a buyer for a priority slice of land rights for ecological research. I even had an old friend, a retired urban planner, listed as strategic advisor to legitimize the move. Northbridge bit faster than expected. They saw profit in selling a small parcel to Haven Creek up front, pocketing quick cash while waiting for the larger project's approval. The secret contract was signed on a Friday afternoon at the county notary's office. In my hand was the deed confirming Haven Creek LLC as the sole owner of the 3 eastern acres land my father had flagged as eligible for light infrastructure development. I told no one. I let things look as if I remained withdrawn, hurt. I went to work, filed reports on time, posted casual photos of office plants on social media, enough calm to convince them I had learned my place. By mid-month, my mother invited me to lunch at an Italian restaurant near the Upper East Side. I arrived on time, dressed in a pale gray sweater, hair tied back, light makeup. She smiled gracefully. You're calmer now, I see. Your silence comforts me. Families always need harmony, Savannah. I nodded without expression. She ordered 2 glasses of white wine. I hear Northbridge is pleased. They're finalizing the deposit. Ethan will sign the contract next month. I cut a piece of toasted bread, dipped it into olive oil, and said evenly, Congratulations, Mother. I'm glad Ethan has a new direction. She touched my hand gently, her eyes softening. It makes me happy you understand. Eleanor raised you well, but reality matters. Sentiment can't hold land forever. Ethan needs a chance to rebuild. I met her gaze without bitterness. I understand completely. We ate in peace. She must have thought the storm had passed. 2 weeks later, Rachel texted me. Charles and Ethan will sign the main contract with Northbridge on Tuesday morning. They don't know Haven Creek already owns the critical parcel. I printed every document, placed them in a black folder. Inside was the notarized deed, the county certified map, and a letter from the planning office confirming the project could not proceed without those 3 eastern acres. On Tuesday morning, I arrived at the Elmwood Hotel's 6th floor conference room, where the signing was held in private. I walked in mid-meeting, navy suit, hair in a tight bun, folder in hand. Charles's eyes widened. Savannah? What are you doing here? Ethan froze, his glance darting at the Northbridge representatives whispering among themselves. I placed the folder on the table, opened it calmly. Good morning. I'm the legal representative of Haven Creek LLC, the current owner of the 3 acres this project intends to use. Silence, I continued, voice low but sharp as steel. Any agreement lacking Haven Creek's consent holds no legal weight, and if anyone signs without authority, that's fraud. Charles clenched his fists, his face drained of color. Ethan opened his mouth but had no words. I turned to the Northbridge team, smiling politely. If you wish to continue negotiations, we can schedule a formal meeting next week. But let me be clear, that land is no longer part of any property Charles Warren has the right to transfer. I gathered my papers, turned and walked out, leaving behind a room buzzing with shock, anger, and disbelief. They thought I had surrendered, but they forgot I never accepted being written out of my own story. I received the court summons on a crisp April morning while brewing coffee in Eleanor's old kitchen. Sunlight filtered through the embroidered curtains, casting patterns across the wooden table where we once read together. Outside, finches chirped on the blooming wisteria. Peace held until I heard a car stop by the road, followed by a reluctant knock, heavy as though the messenger didn't want to deliver the news. A young man in a tan suit handed me a thick envelope, avoiding my eyes as if ashamed to be the bearer. Inside was a lawsuit filed by Charles and Linda Warren, with Ethan as legal representative, demanding the court declare Eleanor's will invalid due to lack of mental capacity at the time of signing. I folded the papers neatly, set them on the table, and poured the rest of my coffee. The aroma was rich, but no bitterness touched me. I called Rachel at 9:30. They filed, I said evenly. I expected it. Did they give a reason? My grandmother was declared incompetent for the last 2 weeks of her life. Silence hummed on the line. Savannah, how do you want to counter? Steady, I replied, but unyielding. We began gathering evidence immediately. I visited the local clinic where Eleanor had her regular checkups for years. Dr. Henderson, who had followed her health since my college days, signed a sworn statement without hesitation. The patient remained fully lucid, independent, and capable of legal decision-making until her final day. I stopped by the town library, where she volunteered every Wednesday. Miriam, the manager, handed me a notebook filled with Eleanor's neat handwriting, full of proposals for children's reading programs written just days before she passed. I met Mr. Harold Greer, our neighbor of 30 years, the man who had played chess with my grandmother every Sunday afternoon. He smiled faintly as he signed the affidavit. Eleanor, not in her right mind, I lost 39 games straight to her. If that was confusion, then I'd say this whole town has gone insane. Rachel submitted the entire file to the court's attorney. We didn't rush. We let the other side grow impatient, filing extra motions to dig into medical history, requesting delays to gather proper witnesses. While they scrambled to bend the truth, Rachel and I combed through every digital trace tied to the so-called consent contract Ethan had sent me. Hidden metadata revealed the PDF was created on a computer in Charles's office only a week after my grandmother passed. Even worse, the IP trail linked to an email from his personal legal assistant who, fearing liability, later signed a sworn statement before a notary that she had acted under direct orders from her superior, with no authority to alter content. The first hearing was set for Monday morning at the Lamoille County Courthouse. I wore a light gray suit pinned with my grandmother's old brooch on the lapel. Rachel walked beside me, her face stern but her eyes steady. Across the room sat my parents and Ethan, shoulder to shoulder. Charles stared straight ahead. Linda kept her head slightly bowed, and Ethan's eyes darted nervously as his hands clenched a folder. The judge was Marian Copley, a woman who had once lived in our town before moving on to the state bench. I caught her glance at me, then at the towering stacks of documents from both sides. She exhaled softly, then began. The plaintiffs opened by stressing Eleanor's age and supposed mild cognitive decline, that they claimed impaired her ability to make legal decisions. They cited moments when she forgot her reading glasses or mixed up an appointment normal for someone nearing 80, twisted into evidence of severe incapacity. They called Ethan to the stand. He spoke softly, pretending calm. I loved Grandma deeply, but in those last months I noticed she was losing orientation. She kept asking about the simplest things. One day, she even forgot the name of her closest friend. Rachel rose the moment he finished. Do you hold any degree in clinical psychology? Ethan froze. No. Do you have any medical records where a doctor reached that conclusion? No, but No need for speculation. Thank you. Next, we called Dr. Henderson, then Miriam, then Mr. Greer, each offering a piece that built a full picture. My grandmother had remained sharp until her final day. Then Rachel laid out the forensic proof of the forged signature, the document edits, and the internal emails from Charles's assistant. The air in the courtroom grew heavy. Charles began to sweat. Linda gripped Ethan's hand under the table. Judge Copley pushed her glasses up the bridge of her nose, her voice even but unmistakably firm. After reviewing all records, testimonies, and evidence, the court upholds the validity of Eleanor Warren's will, signed in 2019. All assets listed therein shall be executed according to the decedent's wishes. I didn't celebrate. I only gave a slight nod, clutching my folder, and glanced at Rachel. She didn't smile either, but her eyes glowed with a quiet peace. On the other side, chairs scraped sharply. Charles rose first, pale as chalk. Ethan yanked off his tie. Linda dabbed her eyes with a silk handkerchief, her gaze empty, no longer angry, just hollow. I walked out with steady strides, each step echoing like an unspoken vow. I had never been the one left behind in this story. They had chosen to play the villains. I had simply kept to the path that was mine. I thought the storm would settle after court. I was wrong. Rachel was always sharper than me. As we sat in Eleanor's old study reviewing the property records, her brow furrowed over a faint line on a photocopied deed from 5 years ago. Savannah, she said, pointing at the note. There's a temporary mortgage entry dated October, 5 years back. It was removed from the public file weeks later, but there's no record of official release. Strange. I leaned back in the wooden chair, staring up at the chandelier of crystal droplets my grandmother once polished. You think they mortgaged the farm? Rachel nodded slowly. I think they did, and covered it up. We filed a request with Green Hills Community Credit Union, the small-town bank that Eleanor had never borrowed from, but where her land title was co-registered. 3 days later, the response arrived. Rachel slid it across the table to me. It stated, clearly, on October 4th, 5 years prior, Charles Warren, acting as co-owner and temporary power of attorney, while Eleanor was hospitalized for a mild stroke, signed a mortgage on Green Valley Farm to secure a loan of $260,000. The funds were dispersed to a third party, Ethan Warren. My throat tightened. Rachel read it aloud, her tone like an indictment. This is why they did everything, Savannah. Not out of love for the home, not out of family honor, but to bury financial fraud. I rose, stepped onto the porch, and looked over the quiet valley. In the late afternoon light, the old oak at the gate glowed gold. Eleanor used to say every secret eventually surfaces, like rotten wood after rain. I remembered my last private conversation with Charles, a few months before she died. He had summoned me to my parents' house with the note, important matter to discuss. He welcomed me into his office, no Linda, no Ethan. The room reeked of stale cigars and pine cologne. Your mother's estate must be handled carefully, he said, his voice feigning gravity. You're still young. Kindness can make people act rashly. I sat across, silent. You shouldn't be the sole name on title. It could be misinterpreted. People might feel excluded. At the time, I thought he meant pride. Now I knew he meant risk of exposure. Had I stayed silent, that mortgage would never have surfaced. But now, having dug deeper, they would have to face the consequences. Rachel sent the full report to the county prosecutor's office. We didn't press formal charges, didn't need to. The mere existence of that evidence was enough to corner them. Not long after, Charles's lawyer sent a settlement proposal, the language surprisingly humble. The family would withdraw all claims on any property named in the will, seeking resolution in a spirit of respect for the deceased. I didn't respond immediately. That evening, I drove to my parents' house. This was not a tender reunion. I wanted no tears or embraces. I only wanted to look my father in the eye, the man who once taught me to tie shoelaces, and ask the question I had carried too long: why? He sat behind his desk, older than I remembered. Linda stood in the corner, eyes averted. "I trusted you," I said slowly. "Enough to come back. Enough to believe I could help this family. And you took that trust and used it to mask debt and fraud." Charles exhaled, dry as wind through rafters. "I never thought it would go this far. I only meant to borrow, to put it back later." "With what? By seizing the house from me, throwing me out?" He had no answer. Linda's voice broke in, trembling. "We did it for Ethan. What mother wouldn't save her son? He was desperate. He is my son." I turned to her. For the first time in years, I felt no anger, only a coldness like a winter night with no power. "And what am I? Not your child?" She looked away. I didn't stay longer. Driving back, I stopped at the farm. The apple trees I had planted last year were budding. I slipped off my shoes, walked barefoot on the cool grass, each heartbeat steady in the quiet. I understood then, to them, I was never a priority. Only a shield, a fallback when all else failed. But now, the shield had grown legs and stood upright. I no longer needed their approval, no longer needed their version of love. I only needed truth. And I had it. I woke to my phone buzzing nonstop. Rachel's voice was urgent, tight. "Savannah?" A large moving truck just pulled into the farm gates. I checked the cameras. It's from Blue Creek Movers. I shot upright, heart pounding. "Ethan?" "Not just him. Linda, too. They've brought at least 5 movers and a pickup loaded with boxes." I didn't ask further. Within 10 minutes, I was at the Green Valley Sheriff's Station, carrying the court order for protection of personal and real property signed last week after proof of Ethan and Charles's threats. Deputy Sheriff Jenkins, who had known my family since his milk delivery badge days, said little. He only gave me a steady look and nodded. "Get in. I'll go with you." We arrived within 20 minutes. The iron gate, secured by a keypad last month, had been wedged open with a brick. The moving truck sat in the yard. Men in blue uniforms hauled boxes into the house. I stepped out, my shoes pressing into damp red earth left by last night's rain. The air smelled of wet grass and rotting wood. Linda stood by the porch, arms folded, eyes sliding away when I met them. Ethan barked at a mover, pointing. "Put the speakers in the left corner, by the window." I wasted no time. I pulled the court order from my coat and held it before the crew supervisor. "You and your crew need to stop immediately. This is a property protection order issued by the Green Valley Superior Court. This house may not be occupied, altered, or moved into without the written consent of the legal owner." The supervisor, a stocky Irishman in his 50s, glanced at the paper, then turned to Ethan. "You said she agreed." I turned to Ethan, my voice calm. "The only person authorized to let anyone move in here is me, and I don't give permission." Ethan hurled the speaker remote onto the floor and let out a sharp laugh. "Who do you think you are to give orders here? This house was Grandma's. My grandma. I have every right to be here." Deputy Jenkins stepped forward. He didn't need his badge, just his steady frame and quiet authority. Mr. Ethan Warren, if you continue to defy a court order, will be forced to file charges and carry out lawful removal. Ethan stared at the deputy as if he had grown two heads. Then his glare snapped back to me, tight as a drawn bowstring. You really are shameless, doing everything you can to shove your family out, just to play the princess heir of this farm. You'll regret this. I didn't answer. My eyes shifted toward the outer wall, where a small fist-sized security camera silently recorded every movement. Ethan stormed into the house, yanking open Eleanor's old cabinet of yarn. Hinges squealed like they were crying. He kicked a wooden chair into the wall, sending my grandmother's framed photo crashing to the floor, shattering. Linda screamed, "Ethan, stop!" But he didn't. He swept his arm across the windowsill, knocking flower pots to the ground, stomping over boxes he himself had brought. Shards, soil, and old books scattered as if he were unloading years of bitterness onto every fragile thing in sight. Deputy Jenkins grabbed his radio. "Call in another unit. We need safe enforcement." No injuries. Within minutes, 2 more patrol cars pulled up. Ethan was restrained as he thrashed, cursing words I never thought a grown man could shout at his own sister. Neighbors gathered. Mrs. Henderson from the southern farm stood frozen in muddy boots, a basket of eggs in hand. Mr. Jerry, who ran the hardware store in town, leaned on his pickup, watching quietly. Maybe they too had once believed the rift between me and my family was just personal squabbling. Not anymore. A retired firefighter named Mike, who lived at the end of the road, shook his head slowly as officers led Ethan away, wrists cuffed, still shouting in a frenzy. Never thought I'd see this. Linda sank onto the porch steps, hands covering her face, trembling with shock. No one comforted her. No one stepped forward. No one saw me as the ungrateful child anymore. No one called me cold-blooded. Because they had seen with their own eyes who was destroying a legacy and who was keeping it standing. I climbed the porch, picked up my grandmother's photo from the tiles. The broken glass cut into my hand, but I didn't flinch. I stared at her eyes in the picture, smiling gently, as if still watching over me. No words needed, no defense required. Sometimes truth only needs to be seen. And today it had been seen, clearer than ever. That June, the final hearing was held in the Green Valley County Courthouse. I sat in the first row, on the old wooden bench polished by decades of use. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, falling across my shoulders like a reminder that truth has its own light, hidden or not. It will always emerge. Judge Campbell, presiding over the civil case between me and my family, read the judgment in a steady voice, each word solid as stone pillars. Based on the evidence presented, including the valid will of Eleanor Warren, authenticated legal documents regarding ownership and security recordings from the farm, the court declares Miss Savannah Warren is the lawful heir of the entire Willow Creek estate, including residence, farmland, and associated property. I exhaled lightly at those words, but the next ones tightened my chest. As for defendant Ethan Warren, the court finds willful property destruction with intent to cause damage, based on surveillance footage and eyewitness testimony. The defendant is ordered to pay full restitution and to complete 18 months of mandatory rehabilitation at the Civil Behavior Management Center. The courtroom went silent. Ethan wasn't present. He had been taken weeks earlier after violating the restraining order and attempting to break into the farm at midnight. Word of his behavior spread quickly through town. Nobody tried to defend him anymore. Days later, I received notice from the tax authority. A federal investigation quietly initiated by my attorney had uncovered the trail. Unauthorized withdrawals from my grandmother's retirement fund, forged mortgage contracts, and 2 fake investments under Charles Warren's name. Criminal prosecution was underway. The man once proud to be the family's pillar now faced serious financial fraud charges. I felt no triumph, no pity either. Truth has its cost, and no price is lower than dignity. My mother came one evening as the sun set over the valley. She was no longer neatly dressed, her coat wrinkled, eyes sunken, but her walk still carried a trace of old pride. I led her onto the porch, brewed black tea, but didn't invite her to sit. Her gaze swept the scene, peonies blooming in pale pink, wrapping the porch like soft arms of memory. "You did the right thing," she whispered, her eyes fixed not on me but on the wooden swing at the back of the garden, where Ethan and I once counted stars. I stayed silent. "Still, I'm your mother, no matter what you think." "I don't think anything anymore, Mom. I just can't go on forgiving as if the scars never happened." Her eyes lowered, then she rose. "If one day you feel like talking again, I'll be here." I nodded, without promise. She turned, walking slowly down the gravel path. I didn't see her off. That summer, I cleared out the old barn and restored the back garden where Eleanor had once planted vegetables, nursed flowers, and welcomed law students each holiday. With Rachel and a group of students, I founded the Eleanor Foundation, a nonprofit offering scholarships and housing for underprivileged law students from rural areas. Each year, 6 full scholarships were awarded, paired with community law practice at Willow Creek. The house was no longer a battlefield. It became a center. A place for learning, for healing, for carrying forward the good my grandmother began. One September afternoon, when the peonies bloomed like pink clouds, I received a brown envelope. The handwriting, shaky yet familiar, pierced my chest. "Ethan Warren, Cambridge Rehabilitation Center." I sat on the old rocking chair on the porch, hands trembling as I opened it. Inside was a thin sheet of paper, neatly folded, handwriting clumsy but earnest. "Savannah, if you're reading this, it means you still left a door open for forgiveness, even if only by your silence." I was furious. Furious to the point of madness. But the truth is, I never understood why Grandma only trusted you. Not because you were smarter, not because you studied law, not because you knew the right process. It was because you stayed. You didn't leave when everyone else turned away. I was jealous. Jealous enough to be foolish. Jealous enough to destroy the very place that should have been our home together. I'm not asking forgiveness. Just want you to know, for the first time, I understand why Eleanor chose you. I hope one day, when I walk out of here, you won't turn your back. But if you do, I'll understand. Ethan. I folded the letter, placed it on my lap. Evening light streaked the porch tiles with honey-colored shadows, fading with each breeze. The peonies bloomed, needing no command. Like life bursting in its season, no matter how many harsh winds had passed. I sat quietly on the porch, eyes on each petal trembling in the dusk. And in that moment, it wasn't victory, it wasn't revenge, it was peace. A new life began, free of blame, only freedom, and my own choice. I don't know if Ethan will truly change, or if my mother will ever regret what happened. But I know one thing: I no longer live to please anyone. I live for truth, for the values Eleanor taught me, and for the young people who need a chance as I once did. What do you think about everything I've just shared? If you were in my place, caught between family and justice, between blood and honor, what would you choose? Forgiveness, silence, or standing up for what's right? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't hesitate to share them in the comments, because your story might be the strength someone else needs. And if you'd like to keep walking with me through more stories of family, choices, and freedom, please subscribe to the channel. There's so much more I want to share, and I hope you'll be there to listen, like a true friend who understands what family sometimes fails to. Thank you for staying until the end. See you in the next story.